Here's the practical application. This means living intentionally, being faithful in daily tasks, because Colossians chapter 3, verse 23 and 24 says this, whatever you do, do your work heartily as for the Lord and not for people, knowing that it is from the Lord that you will receive the reward of inheritance. It is the Lord Christ in whom you serve. Ladies and gentlemen, Genesis chapter 14, verse 20 says, and watch this, and be blessed, God Most High, who has handed over your enemies to you. And he gave him a tenth of everything. That's where Abram gives a tenth to Melchizedek. Now, let me help you. You can write down, if you're taking notes, Exodus chapter 2, the first 10 verses 1 through 10, but then also write down Exodus chapter 19 and chapter 20. Let me help you. Why? Because this is where Moses and the law shows up. So now if we do a chronological order of understanding, that giving was one of the very first things set in place before Moses steps on the scene, then you have to understand that Genesis, ladies and gentlemen, around verse 14 is where we see Abram give the tenth. However, in Exodus, ladies and gentlemen, Moses steps on the scene with the law. In other words, the Ten Commandments. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, don't get it twisted. Don't let anybody ever tell you or box your thinking into a box to tell you that tithing is no longer a spiritual and a practical principle that God wants us to practice. It is a false doctrine. Ladies and gentlemen, let me help you.